Derek Herrera's story is what Stopportunities is all about. A special operations Marine Raider paralyzed in combat who turned unimaginable disruption into purpose, innovation, and leadership as CEO of Bright Euro. This episode is about courage, clarity, and the power of pausing long enough to find your next mission. You don't want to miss this one. Welcome to Stopportunities, the podcast about turning disruption into momentum. Today's guest is Derek Herrera, Marine Raider turned founder and CEO of Bright Euro. His story starts with a moment that could have literally ended everything and turns into one of the clearest, most powerfully meaningful examples of what I think it means or what it looks like to take a complete disruption and build something meaningful on the other side. Derek, welcome. I've really been looking forward to this for quite some time.
It's a pleasure to be here with you, Mark. Thanks for the opportunity.
Absolutely. I know you have been forthcoming in sharing your story. And I think when people hear your story, they kind of focus on what's happened. But I'd really like to understand, and maybe we just start with what was the moment, the moment momentum broke and you had to kind of decide what was going to happen. And as we've talked about this notion of a stopportunity, this moment where disruption hits and you need to sit in the stillness and understand what does next look like. So can you take us back to that moment and share what it was like?
Definitely. So on June 14th, 2012, I was shot and paralyzed from the chest down while serving as a Marine Raider team commander in Afghanistan. And so prior to that event, I had spent my career and young adult life preparing for the opportunity to serve the country as a Marine infantry officer and then transitioning into the special operations community and felt complete fulfillment, purpose, and passion, and would have continued to do that for the rest of my life. I loved what I was doing. I loved the people I was working with and the missions that we were on and the impact we were having. And then in an instant, things changed. And so while leading my team on a patrol, a bullet entered my left shoulder and came to rest in my spinal column at the T6 level, right around the chest level. And immediately I slumped over, realized I couldn't pick myself up and that everything below my chest level was paralyzed. And so that happened on June 14th, 2012. And I have been paralyzed, continue to be to this day and use a wheelchair to get around. And so that was the moment for me where my life took a turn I had never predicted.
Yeah, man, it's very difficult to predict something like that, certainly. Can you share what was happening around you, what that moment was like, physically, mentally?
Absolutely. So I was leading a small team on patrol. And so we had about 10 Americans and 10 of our Afghan partners inside of a small building, a really kind of tiny farm out in the middle of the Helmand province in Afghanistan. And shortly after sunrise, we'd occupied this building, basically to try to observe the area and identify any enemy activity from the Taliban, which had been heavily influencing the region. And so we occupied in the cover of darkness, and then shortly after sun rose, I had switched out with my assistant patrol leader who was on the rooftop. And then a few minutes later, this had occurred. And we knew the environment we were in was highly combative and chaotic and kinetic, and that there was a lot of enemy activity. So we knew what we were getting into. But in that moment, for me personally, as I slumped over, I had a range of emotions that I went through, and all were pretty normal. I think the initial one was just, a little bit of fear and uncertainty because it was uncertain that I would survive this incident, because there was essentially a massive firefight and enemy engagement going on while this was happening. I also had identified that the other Marine who was on the roof with me as well, he had been shot through the neck and was laying there face down, and we thought he was dead, and so there was uh, a feeling of sorrow at that time. And then, like for a brief moment, I felt kind of an odd emotion, which was um, just a totally unfamiliar feeling for me, which was that a lot of things were out of my control, and so not necessarily um, any sort of peace or relief, but it just was uh, just a feeling that I hadn't felt really for my entire, you know, life. Like I had gotten to that point with the unit I was with because I believed that, for better or for worse, that I could influence the outcome of any challenge that I took on, and this was different. And so I knew that I had to rely 100% on my teammates to save my life and to try to get me out of there, and that so much was no longer within my control. I had no real impact on the outcome. And so that was how I felt for a brief time. And then as time continued to go forward, my team was returning fire and trying to repel the enemy activity, also while calling in airstrikes and calling in a medevac helicopter, um, trying to treat us, get us off the roof, and stabilize us. And in a very relatively short time, as we're trained to do, we start to think about different things that we can do. And so at that point, the only thing I could do was talk, really, and try to pass information to my teammates, and try to do anything I could to maintain a positive attitude to help uh, ensure that they were successful and had the right mindset to survive, because they also were in grave danger during that period of time. And ultimately, that event culminated for me a few minutes, or maybe probably, I don't know, 30 minutes, 40 minutes later, probably, um, when they were able to get us out, myself and the sergeant who'd been shot through the neck, who actually has survived and made a full recovery, which is a miracle. They were able to get us out onto the helicopters to get us to the hospital at a different base in Afghanistan. And that moment is the moment I'll never forget. I was awake throughout the period, and what happened in that moment, and uh, the reason that a lot of these Marines and sailors were decorated for their bravery and valor, was when we were inside of this building, we had these large concrete or mud walls, and those would stop enemy bullets from coming through for the most part. So a high level of protection. But in order to get us out onto the helicopter, they had to expose themselves and run and carry us out into this open field, where not only did they not have the protection of those walls, but they also, because they were carrying us on these basically what we call a polis litter. It's basically just looks like a big kind of uh, tarp that you can grab, but it takes a minimum of 4, sometimes 6 people to carry these. So in order to carry these while they're running out into the field to get us onto the helicopter, they're under enemy fire with bullets flying around and zapping the ground around them, and they're unable to return fire because they can't really pick up their gun while they're running and trying to carry us and effectively engage the enemy. So, so what happened in that moment was every one of them made a choice, and they knew what they were going out into, and they realized that in order to do that, they had to take a massive risk and risk their lives, and that if they're successful, that we would survive, or we'd have a chance of survival. But they did that knowing full well that when they stepped out into the open, into the breach, they realized that they were risking everything to try to save our lives. And so that's the only reason that Ricky, the sergeant, and I are alive today. And the way that felt for me was that it was what I like to call the best and worst day of my life. It was the worst day of my life because I could no longer be a Marine Raider. I was injured in a permanent fashion, and had all these challenges that I had to reorient my life to address. But as a leader, I don't think that I'll ever encounter a situation that will match the level of gratitude and pride I had in being a part of a team with men like that. that were willing to do that on my behalf. And so it's a humbling event for me, but also very flattering as a leader, just to even be associated with those type of people.
Yeah. Wow. That's truly incredible. And yeah, thank you for obviously for your service and for this, for sharing this with us. This um, just puts it, you're just literally a war hero, and we're thankful for that. And um, I'm just trying to remove myself from this picture that you painted, and it's very difficult to do. I'm really curious, having known you for a few years now. I have really found value in your attitude and leadership. You mentioned before the medevacs came, the only thing you could do was talk, um, and you were trying to say things that were encouraging. Can you give us an example of what that might have been like, or what you might have said?
It depends on the rating of this show. There's some really dark humor in the Marine Corps, for better or for worse, and
Yeah,
we make some odd jokes at times, and say some different things. And so, uh, in that moment, I'd said some stuff to one of our Marines where I was just trying to like kind of joke around and mess with him and stuff, and just trying to maintain an upbeat and a positive attitude to where he wasn't like as concerned. He would be more at like, I guess, less concerned about my survival because I'm able to like still banter with him in
yeah,
that manner.
okay,
So I said some of that stuff, and then I also was trying to like at least talk to him about other things that I thought could help, like where I thought I'd seen enemy fighters and other things. Um, but that was kind of the thing that I thought about, and that carried throughout like other stages of the recovery as well. In the initial aftermath was um, one of the big challenges I had too after I'd moved on was um, I was alone essentially for that period of time. And I also had no impact about what my team would endure for the next 6 months of the deployment. So there was a 7 month deployment, and I was the commander. So I was in charge of trying to lead the team and make sure that they were successful. And essentially all came back home. And uh, I went from being a part of that to now I'm in a hospital, and now these guys are still out there, and what are they facing for the next 6 months? And when I say alone, my wife and my family and everybody was there, but in the Marine Corps and the military in general, you don't do anything alone. From day one, they're like, in boot camp, they're like, oh, you're going to the bathroom, take a buddy. you know you
mm,
don't go alone, you're always together.
mm,
And so I was thrust into a different environment where I was alone, and or not alone, I had my family, but I was separated from my team where I had no impact on the outcome of their deployment. And so those are the kinds of things that I was, you know, talking to them about. And throughout that process, when I was in the hospital and these guys would call me to check on me and stuff, um, the only thing I could do to influence it was try to maintain a positive attitude and talk to them and make them understand that uh, I'm grateful for the opportunities that I still have, due to their heroism. Um, and so that's kind of the mindset that I started to try to adopt.
yeah. It, uh, you had mentioned that there was a moment where um, I think you said it was like a switch flipped, and you realized that um, you went from recovery to what's next. Was this that time when that kind of sunk in, or
No, that was a bit
eh,
further down the line. So the uh, the part that I haven't really described was just the journey to get to that point. And uh, what happened was basically I got on this helicopter. Uh, they got me to the next um, echelon of care at the hospital in Afghanistan. A few hours later, they put me on a plane to Germany. I stayed there for a couple days, and then eventually maybe went back to the U.S. Um, while I was at the hospital in Afghanistan, I was very fortunate that I was able to call my wife and tell her what had happened. So I made that phone call and delivered the news to her myself, which, was really hard to do, but, uh, you know, it was just good that I was able to do that because a lot of, situations could have been worse. And so started to move back. I stayed in a hospital in Florida. My wife and I uprooted to go there and to do the initial recovery. And then after a certain period of time, wanted to go back to work. And so we moved back to California where I previously was stationed and started trying to go back to work. And the mindset I adopted was that I wanted to be doing things of value and that, I still could contribute and that I gained a lot of my identity previously was centered around, my work and the purpose and the mission behind it. And so even though I could no longer physically participate, there were other things that I could do administratively and operationally to support the team. But more importantly, to be around the people that I was around. And as I was kind of coming to grips with some of the more challenging times, one of the most challenging parts was that when I first got injured, and this is typically very common of spinal cord injuries, is they won't tell you that you're never going to walk again. They just tell you, this is very serious. And what the data shows is that some people recover a little bit, some people don't. We don't quite know how to predict who's going to recover and who doesn't. But usually what the data shows is in the first couple of years, first 2 years, if you're going to recover, it'll likely have happened during that time. And so that leaves a window of positivity and optimism available. And that's good until it's not, right? Because then it's like you can be so upbeat and so, motivated and do all the therapy and everything else. But this type of injury is one where those things may or may not help you recover.
Yeah.
And it's out of your control. And so for me, I had a very positive attitude where I was like, oh, cool. This is another challenge. I've been dealing with these types of challenges all my life, and I always will work harder. I'll do whatever it takes to be successful. So I can do this too. But what I quickly learned was that I was humbled in the way that I found was no matter what I did, I could not change the result. And this was a bit out of my control. And so when I was confronted with that, now it became real where it's like, you know what, maybe I'm going to use a wheelchair for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
And then that kind of changed my mindset to where, I had the period of wallowing in self-pity and all of the, those types of challenges. A couple of months after I got injured, though, one of my friends, Matthew Manukian, who was the captain of another team, along with 2 other Marines, Sky Moat and Ryan Jeske, unfortunately were killed in an insider attack in Afghanistan. And that was incredibly challenging for me because it also just, not only were those guys killed, but it also was an example of the things that my team was still dealing with and fighting. And again, I had no impact on the outcome of whether they would make it out or not. So that was probably the lowest point I would say for me. And that was really challenging. But over time, shortly after that, probably around the 6, 7, 8 month mark, the team had come back and they were all back in the United States and survived the deployment and everything was fine. I'd gone back to work. But I was still struggling with trying to understand and frame in my mind how to move forward in a way that was meaningful and impactful and dealing with all the things that I'd lost or what I thought I'd lost, right? I'd lost the ability to walk. I'd lost the ability to do so many things. And it's very easy to get into a negative mindset when that occurs. But what I realized pretty quickly was I have a lot of opportunities as well. And opportunities that I have, other people would be grateful to have. So like any one of those 3 guys, Matt, Ryan, or Sky, they would be happy to be alive and have my opportunity. Someone also always has, it can always be worse. And that's not always a great strategy to just think about somebody having it worse than you because it doesn't take away the way that you feel. But it is possible to reframe things in your mind. And for me, it was a very clear thing, which was I have a choice that I can make. I can either continue to choose and go down this path and think about all the things I don't have and feel sorry for myself and just kind of languish or do something, or I can choose a different path. And try to pursue something and live my life in a way that would make them proud and honor their legacies and the sacrifices that those guys had made. Uh, my teammates, the ones that saved my life, they risked their lives to save mine. So I have this opportunity because of them. Would they want me to waste it? And just like not take advantage of the opportunities that I have? How would that do to honor the risk that they took in that event? And so those sorts of things make it really easy and for me to consider ways that are just really like a binary outcome, right? This is a choice. I make it every day. When I get up, I want to live my life in a way that would make them proud. And the way that I do that or choose to do that now is to pursue things that can have a positive impact on society and other people, and leverage the skills and the opportunities and the knowledge and experience that I have now for positive impact. And that's what I've been trying to do every day since then. And that's the way that I try to choose every day to take advantage of the opportunities I have to honor them.
Wow, amazing. The way you handled that shift doesn't feel like it happened by accident. I know you had a lot of training going up into the military, but you're enduring a full 360-degree attack on your life, right? Physically, obviously, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, likely. What was were there attributes you built over the years that helped you, or was it really just in that moment connecting to the humanity that you were with for so long?
I think it's a little bit of both. And so one thing that I've learned over the past experiences I've had in past decades is the more prepared you are for certain events, the easier it can be when you encounter them. And so I was in the special operations community. We'd trained, for years and years and years before we ever got put into this scenario. And we knew that even though we were special operators and trained to the highest levels, there's a high likelihood that people are going to get injured or die. And so we were prepared for that. And when your mind is ready for something, that has a big impact on how it affects you. Yeah. And so for us, that's one thing I've learned is a way to phrase it is the worst day in your life is the worst day in your life. And, you can't really compare it to different people because different people have different life experiences and they may or may not be as well prepared or equipped to handle things. But the thing that is common across everybody that I've learned is if you're a human and you live long enough, you will experience trauma, suffering, loss, setbacks, all those things. And so it's not if, but when you'll have to confront these things. It's just life. It's just the human experience. And so the thing that I've tried to share with people is preparing for it. The more prepared you are, the more resilient you can be. And the resilience can extend across different areas of your life. Your spiritual resilience, your physical resilience, your mental toughness and resilience. It can be trained. It can be like a muscle, right? That you exercise and build. And so some of the people that I know that had the hardest times dealing with certain things are people that, for better or for worse, have just had very little challenges or experience in their life. And they may not have proactively sought out hard things.
Yeah.
Other people have had absolutely traumatic experiences and everything else. And some of those people still end up as victors because they've been able to deal with and manage and adapt and build those muscles to survive and not only survive, but thrive in a lot of experiences. So there's like some really simple kind of philosophies or approach to that. And it's like, just in general, doing hard things makes you a better person. It makes you more resilient. Challenging yourself, being physically resilient, being mentally resilient, all of those things you know, believing in some sort of spirituality or religion, having a family and a network or a tribe of people that you can rely on and trust. Those are some of the foundational things. And so that's one aspect of it. And the other thing which I found was interesting too is uh, just studying it a little bit from like an ethical or like philosophical perspective. So one of the things which is interesting and people may not know is I went to the Naval Academy, and for the past probably 40 or 50 years, they have a mandatory class for everybody, and it's ethics and philosophy. And so a lot of that was rooted and originally taught by people like Admiral James Stockdale, who was a Medal of Honor recipient from the Vietnam War, where he was in captivity for, I believe, 6 or 7 years, and John McCain and all these guys. And what they credited with their success was they survived the most horrific conditions and then came back to America. Not only did they survive, but they thrived.
Yeah.
Senator John McCain went on to do great things. Admiral James Stockdale, same thing. And what they did was they had a philosophy of stoicism, and that was what they credited with helping them to understand and maintain sanity throughout that ordeal for them, and also their ability to return to society. So for me, studying that, having that foundation, that was interesting. Also another one, which is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, understanding how your behaviors can be driven by certain incentives or motivations. Those sorts of things were all helpful for me.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that preparation for dealing with some of this disruption. Are you familiar with the Kubler-Ross curve of change? When change hits, you go through shock and denial and frustration and anger before you start to accept it. And this the model I have as part of Stopportunities is called PAUSE, and it's an acronym for preparing, properly prepare, assess the situation, truly understand what that situation is saying to you before you can then strategize and execute. And I agree that if you can identify and even just practice, rehearse some of those worst case scenarios, then I think if you hit that Kubler-Ross shock dip, it's going to be less of a dip in general, and you'll be able to navigate through that. I was really intrigued. You had shared in our pre-call a couple of weeks ago that you had so much of your identity built around a military career and being a military man, and now your identity has shifted to being able to manage and lead through difficult, hard things, and that's a really amazing shift and super inspirational. How do you react to that?
Was very kind of you to say that. I've been very fortunate in what I chose to pursue after I'd left the military. I went back to graduate school, to try to figure out, what was next. And while I was there, I had this experience, and I had the confluence of a variety of factors that led me down the path that I'm on now, which is to be a medical device entrepreneur. And at that point, I was trying to do what we do in the special operations community, which is become an expert in something overnight. And that was spinal cord injury research and innovative technologies. I was the first person to be able to benefit from some new and experimental technologies, specifically exoskeleton technologies, which allowed me to stand and walk without, using a wheelchair. And when I met the guy who had invented this device that was now FDA cleared, he was in a wheelchair, just like me. And he was an engineer, just like me. And he had an idea to solve something, and just with a little bit of effort and commitment and just plugging away over the course of 10 years, he started tinkering away in his garage. And then 10 years later, there's now a device on the market helping people. And they're able to do something that was previously impossible. And that, to me, made it tangible and relatable. Where it's like, he could do that. Why can't I?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of other problems that I experience that no one is solving. So what better use of my time or passion or energy to try to create a lasting impact on a field that I know about personally and care about? Yeah. And that's what led me down this path where I've now been in the urology space, focusing on people with various urological conditions and issues. But while I was at school, one of the things I thought about, and a question I asked myself, which helped me try to illuminate the path that I wanted to go down and the purpose that I was looking to accomplish was, uh, I asked myself a question, and what it was of all the things that I could do in the world, is there something in the world that only I can do? And what are my unique life experiences and my desires, my goals, my skills, and everything? And what I thought at that time was, I think that I have a unique perspective because I'm a patient and I'm a user of all these technologies, or I experience these problems because of my injuries. But I'm also an engineer, a problem solver, um, and a leader who can try to, create the future essentially through this medical technology and innovation. That's what we do in the space, which is so powerful and meaningful. Um, and the impact we have uh, is really incredible. And so that's what led me down this path, and it gave me an opportunity to essentially reinvent myself because, um, I could have gone and got a job and done some other stuff or worked in government relations or anything. But another thing that I had as well, which, for better or for worse, was just the reality was I wanted to prove to myself that I could be successful in a different environment than the military and the government environment. So I'd gone to
Mm,
business school and was in this for-profit environment and everything. And in the medical device industry, there are some government engagement requirements like the FDA and Medicare and insurance and stuff, but it's not, the defense industry.
sure.
And not that there's anything wrong with that, but it just, I wanted to take on and bite off a new challenge, right? Because for whatever reason I feel the most passionate and most fulfilled when I'm doing some of the most challenging or insane things. And, and so like that level of like intensity and risk, um, it's kind of just, I guess, core to who I am.
Yeah. I was struck by that when we talked a while ago too. You had mentioned um, the the desire to not stop, right? I mean, by all measures, you had done enough, and now you have, in essence, re, reinvented yourself around this notion of doing hard things, and um, it's it's really cool.
I'm very fortunate. Yeah, it's been amazing. It's been an amazing experience. And one thing I think about too is it's very easy to go into a mindset and think about how good your life would have been or could have been. And you're like, if only this didn't happen to me, if only that, right? But what I call that, and I don't know, I'm sure somebody else has probably already created this, but um, I call it the fallacy of the base case, right? And so your base case before was, my life was so great and everything was awesome, and I was a special operator and it was awesome, and if only I didn't get shot, 15 years later I would still be doing special operations and it would have been awesome. But you don't know that, so it actually could have been a lot worse, right? You know, in my situation, a bullet goes 2 inches one way, it would have missed me completely.
Yeah,
It goes 2 inches the other way, I would have been dead immediately, right? So like, um, it's not productive from a mindset perspective just to like over glamorize the past. Uh, there's nothing really good that comes out of it. What matters is what is and what you do about it. Um, so that's where I kind of found myself in, uh, and an alignment of my skills, my desires, and what like motivates me is doing hard things and tackling tough challenges that are meaningful and impactful for people, and having a lasting impact.
yeah. Well, I think another hallmark of people who know how to lead and work through disruption is to build on your past and understand the things that have made you successful in certain areas or things that need to shift to get you. And you've clearly um, demonstrated that. Um, can we? Can you take us to the moment around shifting into to business? And you had mentioned that was kind of a hard thing too. And you were jokingly sharing, I've made a lot of mistakes and learned from them, and um,
Yeah.
that amazing mentality you had that got you through um, the Afghanistan disruption has certainly paid off in I would imagine all areas of your life, not only business.
Absolutely. Agree. And what I did was not advisable, I don't think, for a lot of people, but I kind of just went for it. And um, I didn't know much about the industry. I didn't have a great network. I worked for another medical device company for a few months just to try to get some experience and learn. Uh, but I just kind of went for it and started a company, and it was brutal. It was really hard. Um, you know, by far the hardest thing I've done professionally, outside of being a special operator in the military, uh, and continue to make mistakes every day, but learn from them and hopefully less of them. You know, as these situations move forward. But the experience was basically, you know, really beneficial for me because when I went for it, and you start a company, um, it's incredibly hard, uh, and inherently there's not a lot of people or resources there. So you have to do a lot of stuff yourself. If you don't know how, you have to figure out how to do everything yourself. And you're learning, but you're doing. And so you get repetition. And it's one of those things where the more you put into it, the more you get out of it. And the faster, the more intelligent and the quicker you can learn, you can exponentially grow as an individual contributor. And so that was kind of the experience I had. I'd started a company in 2015, which started with a napkin sketch and an idea for a device, and we took it and we eventually were able to get a little bit of traction and investment and resources and people, but kind of stalled out and made some had some challenges with the FDA and some of these other things and COVID, and unfortunately that did not succeed as a company or a product. Um, but when I started this company, Bright Euro, was able to leverage all those lessons and those hard, the knowledge that was gained the hard way. And because of that, I've been fortunate to try not to make the same mistakes twice. And obviously things are going much, much better now. And so that was how the experience went for me when I transitioned out of business school. Just kind of like went for it, right? Which is not uncommon for people that want to start companies, is there has to be some level of impulsivity, I guess. And, and you can make up for any of the challenges with that with, I think, just hard work and being a quick learner, in a lot of respects.
Yeah. I love that. I'm kind of smirking because it's just so painfully familiar to me as well. I look back at where some of those really moving learning moments were, and I've had the pleasure of starting 3 different businesses, 2 successful and 1 not. And I look back at some of the failures as probably the most meaningful learning lessons, because it's not like I was the type who would just run into this direction without thinking about it. There's lots of planning that goes into even your failures, and they're so insightful when you can go back and look at them. I've never looked a lot at my successes, the history of successes, and said, "Oh, that was why that was successful." I was always kind of moving on to the next thing. Um, but I did find a lot of value looking back at failures and understanding, okay, where'd the play break down? Uh, how about you? Were there key failures where you're like, oh yeah, that one kind of changed everything?
Definitely. Absolutely. And I made a lot of mistakes because I didn't know what I was doing, right? It was the first time I'd ever done this. And, um, we tried to be very quick learners and, deliver results and overcome a lack of knowledge by surrounding yourself with smart people and listening to them and, learning and getting advice and experience from people who've been there and done that before. And we're very fortunate to have built an amazing network of people who can give me advice and were incredibly helpful. And we were close, but at the end of the day, there was we were still close to succeeding, despite a lot of setbacks and overcoming those setbacks. But ultimately, some of the major lessons learned was just really around some of the foundational aspects of the business, specifically with regulatory engagement, reimbursement strategies, um, some of the market dynamics. There was just a lot of challenges, and those were kind of the significant ones. But then there's other things you learn every day, right? Like down to the more minor details that are also valuable lessons learned about, like, you know, the nuts and bolts and everything else.
Yeah.
But those ones are a little easier to overcome some of those challenges. Whereas, like, the foundation of a business, if there's anything that's not absolutely certain or structured in a manner for success at the foundation at its very core, then no matter how hard you work, you can't really, like, those are very difficult to survive.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious. So, when I was running my creative agency called Morse Code, we were doing all sorts of video content and delivering it to clients by the terabyte. And this was before we had online review systems. So we would upload a video, they would download it, then they would email back all these changes to us. And I was sitting with my developer one afternoon saying, can't we just load this onto a site and create a player where you can see the time code so they can basically click right in the time code and make their, this is the section where I think we need to change the lighting or whatever. And he said, yeah, we could do that. And I didn't do anything with it. Well, we created a product to use internally. We delivered it to our clients and they were using it. It was really successful. And then it stalled because I was looking at other things. I was focused on the agency business. And I look back at some of those kind of minutes because 2 years later, Bright Cove and these other video platforms came out with that exact same thing. And those are the ones where you just kind of hit yourself on the head. Did you have any of those things where you wish you would have, but you didn't?
For me, no, not yet.
Good.
So, like, and that's not a good thing. That's not a good thing. So there's different ends of the spectrum, and I would argue the further out you go, the worse. As long as you're somewhere in the middle, it's probably good. There was somebody who was speaking, and I think they explained it this way, and they were like, for people that have like an entrepreneurial itch or want to found something, one end of the spectrum is you jump at every chance, and every 6 months you're changing direction, right? On the other end of the spectrum is you think you want to be a founder, you probably could, but you never jump. You play it safe. You just stay at a big company, a big corporation. You stay at Google for 20 years and then you retire. The reality is, or this is what some people would suggest the reality is, I think probably true, but probably hard to measure, is for anybody in that environment, there's probably an optimal window of time in your life where you have your best chances for success. And also, there's probably only 1, 2, maybe 3 life-changing good opportunities at the right time that you'll ever experience. And so if you're frequently jumping every 6 months to the next thing and you're like, well, yeah, I had an agency, it was awesome, but then I think the software thing's going to be going, that's one end. The other end is like, oh, I have something great and it is great, but you're too scared to make the jump. Yeah. That's a challenge too. And so it's somewhere in the middle. And that's an example of the base case, the fallacy of the base case, right? It's like, yeah, if only I would have not done my agency and just done this, it would have been awesome. And you're like, well, maybe.
Right.
But also other people had that idea too. And like,
right.
It's probably very competitive. And so, you never know. And you can always look back and like strategize about what different paths could have been. And it is helpful from a learning perspective. Yes. But for me, the reason I don't say there's things I should have done is because I'm over here on this end of the spectrum where I jump too much. Okay. And I know that about myself. So I'm purposely forcing myself not to do that because, I only have a finite window of time where I'm going to be productive, and then I'll be too old, or too tired someday or whatever. Right. I don't know, or I'll have grandkids or whatever.
Yep.
But if I'm changing jobs every year to pivot to something new, or what actually happens in our industry a lot more is not changing jobs every year, but it's allocating your resources across multiple projects at the same time.
For sure.
And it's like, oh, I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do that, or this guy wants me to help with that. And every minute adds up. So what I learned, and I'm forcing myself to do, another thing I learned with my first company, it was going well. We were building the product. Everything was going well. But as someone who hadn't learned that lesson yet, I bit off more than I could chew with other things that continue to eat into my time. And it's like, oh, well, this nonprofit board, that's only 1 or 2 hours a week. Not that big of a deal. But then I'm on 3 nonprofit boards or 4 nonprofit boards, and now it becomes 10 hours a week. And that time is your most precious resource, I think. And um, so it's every minute you spend comes from somewhere else. It comes at a cost. There's a fixed amount of time. You can't create more of it. So that 10 hours is either coming from my main job. And if I would have taken that 10 hours and invested it here, maybe it would have been more successful, maybe not. Or it's coming from other things that are important, like spending time with my family and my kids or whatever else. So knowing that about myself, as I was transitioning and I found this opportunity, I forced myself to do was step off all these boards, stop doing anything else, stop doing projects. People are like, hey, Derek, can you help me with this? And the default answer I have is no. Like,
Yeah.
I can't, I don't have time.
Which is hard for someone like you because of the
It
jump
is.
factor, right?
Yeah, it is. But I've gotten better at it. It's a muscle. You can exercise it. But the answer is no if it's not. And so like now I have a very simple life, but it's awesome. And because of that, I've had much more success, both, personally and professional. So my family life has never been better. I'm around to see my kids do amazing things and grow up. I have twin boys that are 8 years old. My relationship with my wife has never been better. Work has never gone better. And I don't know that would be the case if I didn't protect the time needed to be all in and successful at work and at home. And so now I've gotten much better at saying no. But at the time when I started this company, the decision I made, the choice was, I think this will be $1 billion company. In order to do that, it requires time and effort and intention. And one of the people I'd heard who taught this analogy, it was kind of cool. I like it because it's a scientific term. It's actually like a physics, like a term or a scientific term, but it also has a philosophical analogy too. And what they'd say is, if you're looking under a microscope and you want something to get bigger and you want to magnify it, you have to subtract from the field of view. So you magnify something by subtracting the stuff around it. So when I zoom in and this thing gets huge, I made it huge, but everything on the periphery is gone. And so that's the scientific method of magnification by subtraction. But the philosophical method in your life is, if I want my business to grow and be huge and to be 10x every year, I got to cut all the stuff out on the periphery,
Yeah.
And so like, that was the lesson I learned over the past 10 years. It just is very, like, you have to be judicious about it and like ruthless, unfortunately.
Yeah. I think you even said every yes costs you something. And that's so true. I'm a huge fan of stop doing lists. And so when you were sharing, saying no to all these boards because of protecting of that time, I was very much relating to that. But yeah, the cost of those engagements is sometimes it takes a little bit to learn. Yeah, I think that's
Yeah. And I don't say that to say that this is the only way. This is just what's right for me. And it may or may not be the same for everybody. Some people can have phenomenal lives splitting across 4 or 5 projects or being consultants or on boards or doing anything else. For me, this is the only way I know how to try to achieve what I want to achieve. And so this is not out of any sort of like judgment. It's just a lesson. And what I know, and I've learned from other people, is like, if you want to build $1 billion business, you got to have, commitment to the company and invest the time to do it. Unless you're so good you can do it on 20 hours a week and just working half time. But I don't know anybody that really can do that. Like, I definitely can't do that. So, so I put my time and prioritize and energy into this company because I want to see it succeed.
Yeah. Well, speaking of time and succeeding, can you tell us a little bit about your cycle time You said one of your key philosophies isn't necessarily knowing more; it's learning faster, and then being able to apply that.
Absolutely. One of the big lessons I learned as a young entrepreneur, both at the high level and the lower levels, is on a daily basis, moving quick in order to move quickly and efficiently. The sooner you learn something, the faster you can adapt. And so if I can find something out in 6 weeks and not 6 months, that's incredibly valuable because now I've shortened my cycle time. So we try to optimize everything around organizational agility and reducing that cycle time. And so if I start off and I have a problem and I'm like, well, in order to solve this problem or figure out if this solution is going to work, I have to do this and then this and then this, and it's going to take 12 weeks. The first question we always ask everybody in our company is like, that's a long time.
Yeah.
What can I do in a shorter amount of time to know that this is going to work or not, right? How can I figure out a solution so that I know that in 12 days, not 12 weeks? And if I can do that, those things add up really fast, right? They compound over and over and over and over again. So in every area of our company, we try to optimize for organizational agility, whether it's clinical trials and trying to get data as quickly as possible, obviously without engendering any, like the table stakes in our industry is never to do anything that would put a patient at risk unnecessarily. So that's barring that, moving quickly in the clinic, getting data, getting information, or engineering and R&D or sales, any of this stuff. Moving very quickly and having that agile approach is can really add up to have like just massive growth and speed.
Yeah.
And especially as a startup, like that is your competitive advantage against these large incumbents. They have more resources, more people, more established, more networks, more customers, all that stuff. So, the one thing you have that you can leverage if you choose to is to ensure all the processes and systems and things you do and the culture really of your organization is set up for that type of organizational agility.
Yeah. Yeah. I love even some of the work where we're working together and fleshing out some strategy. You set yourself up into this really great spot where you can then, where you're scaling now in these really powerful directions. And I remember you mentioning earlier this notion of by the time you have like perfect information, it's going to be too late. So how do you know? Do you have a formula that's okay? It's go time, or is it combination of gut, good enough data, and market information?
Yeah, it's different. So it's situationally dependent. So sometimes the bar is higher or lower, but if you go too far on either side, you're not doing it right. So, we say in the military is typically an 80% solution, because you'll never have perfect information or perfect intelligence or perfect, like perfect strategy. Because by the time you do, the situation has changed because it's not a static environment. And there's not many things that are perfectly static environments that never change in the world, in business and life and anything. Like, entropy is real, right? Like things change all the time. So on the spectrum, we say 80%, it's like, I have a pretty good feeling or good instinct or good gut feeling that like, if we do this, it's going to work. And some people are like, well, I want to see more evidence. I want to see more data. I want to see, and it's like, the longer we go before we wait, things continue to change and you can get in this perpetual like analytical cycle. And then the longer you go down that road, you could be getting outcycled by your opponents, your competitors, or you could become obsolete altogether, right? The other end of the spectrum is, which I'm I'll, identify myself as, like, you know, needing remediation on that as well, is like you're too action oriented and you're just like, oh, cool, go, 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 go. Like,
Yeah.
sounds like a good idea. Do it now, and then you don't put any analysis into it. And that also sets you up for failure. So it depends on the situation, but what we typically say as like an analogy is like an 80% solution. So you don't wait for perfect information, but you also don't want to take unnecessary risk without doing any planning.
Yeah.
But a lot of it does rely on your instinct and your gut. And I think that also importantly, one thing that's been important for me to learn is now as we're growing in size and scale is creating the environment for success with leaders in our organization to embrace that approach. And sometimes, depending upon where people have come from, it's harder for them to adapt into that mindset and everything else, because in other companies, they don't always get rewarded for taking risks. It's actually the opposite. They get rewarded for not making mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
And you can never make a mistake if you never do anything. So, like, if there's no incentive for you to do anything or to try anything or take a risk, and you're in this culture where you're incentivized just to not make a mistake, and your goal, because you're in this big company, is just self-preservation, that creates a very dangerous recipe of factors that are not optimal for a winning culture.
Yeah.
And so when I say about this embracing the imperfect solution and being, like, the flip side of that is people have to know, and I have to reinforce to them and make it clear that it's okay for things not to be perfect, and it's okay to make mistakes, because otherwise it's not fair to them to tell them, quit analyzing and do something, but then if I'm over here punishing them because they made a mistake, that also doesn't work. So in our organization, nobody is perfect. And, we don't like freak out when people make mistakes. The only thing that are teachable moments that are a little bit more like harder to swallow is, if Mark makes a mistake today, and then next week, Derek makes a mistake, that one's a little harder to swallow. Mert makes the same mistake. That's harder to swallow because that just means we're not learning as an organization, or we haven't communicated well. So like, that's an unforced error, right? That should never happen, because if Mark made a mistake and we've created an environment where he can be open and honest about it, and then we have the communications infrastructure where we tell everybody about it and we learn, no one in the company should make the same mistake again.
Yeah. Exactly.
So those ones are harder to swallow, and that's not on them. That's on the organization. That's a leadership challenge. Other ones is where a person makes the same mistake over and over again, right? And they don't learn. So like, those ones are harder to swallow. They're still not like fatal. Like, we don't just, like we don't, those are also learning moments, but it's just like over time, those are the ones that are like less optimal, is any sort of unforced error or a failure to learn or adapt. Those are the ones that are more concerning. But like making a single mistake, you can't have a high performance culture and expect people to take risk if you're unwilling to tolerate mistakes.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really critical component for leaders as well. I mean, it's one thing for a creative agency to come up with risky ideas. That's kind of what we are inspired to do, right? Come up with things that are going to break barriers. When I sold Morse Code into Gravity is now private equity owned. And as a leader, I never want my team to not innovate and not take risks. So that puts more pressure on me to make sure that they're thinking out of the box, being risky, taking those risks. And if they are failing in certain ways, then, as you said, let's unpack why. And then I'll take that, I'll own that failure in the eyes of the, be the buffer in essence from the PE firm or whatever. As a business, and you start to scale, I think it's a critical component to manage and make sure never leaves the business,
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Like, that's the whole point of being the leader. You should, like, you bear the responsibility, and you protect the people that work for you, right? It's really no other way to like get the most out of people.
So speaking of leaders, what do you see, and what do you consider some of the bigger mistakes leaders make today?
Uh, there's a variety of things that I commonly see. Um, the zero mistakes or zero defects kind of approach is a bad one. That's pretty common, where people try to push people to work hard and do things and take risks, but then they also are unwilling to tolerate mistakes. So like that's pretty common. Um, Another one which is pretty common is like not trusting the person that you've hired to lead. So um, one thing that I've tried to work on and get better over the past 10, 15 years is um, not solving problems or answering questions. And that doesn't make sense, or it doesn't sound like it makes sense. But uh, if you want people in your organization to lead, one of the ways, one tool that you can use to get them to understand how you think is to ask questions. So if you say, I come to with a problem, here's a problem, what do you think we should do? But my normal answer is like, what do you think we should do? Because they know the problem. They're not only are they closer, and they probably have a better solution than I do anyway, but like, if I teach them how I think, eventually they're going to be much more comfortable solving problems on their own and not even asking me, which is the ultimate goal, because I don't want to be the centralized decision maker and to be making every single decision. I want to make as little decision as possible. And I want everybody else to feel comfortable, because if we brought in these people who have the experience, knowledge, and expertise to lead, and most of them do, because they've been doing this, some of them almost long as I've been alive. Like our senior leadership team here is just awesome. I'm very proud of them that we built at Bright Hero. And so they've been conditioned now long enough where they know that if they come to me with a question, it's really not like, I'm going to ask some questions about it maybe, and maybe give them some pointers or advice, but there's probably nothing I'm going to say that they haven't already thought of.
Yeah.
And they know how I think. And so most of the time it's just more for awareness. They're like, hey, I'm pretty sure we should do this, but what do you think? Or I wanted to make you aware of this. And that also reinforces the organizational agility we can have, because if we're waiting for information to go up and then someone to make a decision before we do stuff, some things have to be that way, but a lot of it doesn't. And so like in the military, we have a term of like, we talk about centralized planning and decentralized execution. So you all need to be on the same plan and the same sheet of music, and we should come together and make sure everybody's aligned in that. But after that, you go out and do it, and the less we have to come back and corral and coordinate and communicate again, the more effective and organizational agility we'll have.
Yeah.
And the way that kind of works out in the military setting is like, if I'm the commander, but I'm back here in the base on the radio, and you're asking me what to do, and you're out there in the middle of a firefight, not only does that not set you up for success, but how should I be the one empowered to make a decision? You're the guy out there. You're the guy on the ground. You've got the most information, and you know things I don't know. Like, you can do it, right? And you don't even have to ask, right? Like, don't ask. The only things you should be asking me for is like, can you get me something? Can you help me? Like, resources or coordination that is outside of your control. And so that's usually one of the things that a lot of people screw up. And I think it's natural too, because another thing for any entrepreneurs or founders is it's a really different challenge to start a business when there's 2 or 3 people. And it's a very different environment to manage when there's 50 or 100 people. And so the person that usually is the good founder, who has the idea or can build stuff, or a good engineer or good entrepreneur, in that stage very frequently has to completely change themselves or be different, or not completely change themselves, but they have to modify their approach and use skills that are very different in that stage of scaling than they did in the infancy of the company. And so for me, my experience when I was in the military was I was always in charge of teams and people because I was an officer. And so I, understood leadership and management. Then I went and started a company, and I was in a super small company and didn't have any direct reports for 6, 7, 8 years. And then now I'm back to being a manager again. So I've had to relearn and adapt and like transition back into this role now where a lot of my day is just leading and managing and helping people. But it took some time, and it was a transition for me to go back into that role. But it just is a very different setting. So that's a big trap too, is the person who's good at building the idea and coming up with the idea and everything else and coding or engineering oftentimes can run into trouble when they're forced to manage a 100-person organization and they don't get to be a contributor. They gotta just manage, and grow the team.
Yeah. And they may not have the skills to do that at the most effective level, especially if you come up as a engineer and you're a great engineer, but you may not be a great manager of people. And there's a lot of stuff to unpack around that. As a leader, is there a band or artist or musician that you would say represents your style?
That one was tough. I was thinking about that for a long time, and I don't know. I don't know if there is one, and I think it's because what I learned is that one of the most important things as a leader is to be adaptable. And so, at first I went through the whole phase of everything. I like all kinds of music, all kinds of band, everything, like
me too.
Everything. But most artists are consistent. So I was trying to think about one who was adaptable. And it was actually kind of hard for me to find because most of the artists we know in bands, they have something they do and they're successful, and that's their style, right?
Yeah.
So,
that's what made them successful. So they stick with it. Yeah.
Yeah. And like for me, I'm not great at any one thing. I'm like decent at a lot of different things, and so like, I don't know, almost like actually one of my friends, his son was playing in a band. He was telling me he was playing a band, and he's like, yeah, they're really cool. There's 3 of them. And after every song, they rotate.
Oh, switches.
So the guy goes from singing and playing guitar to playing bass. And then next song, he goes from playing bass to playing drums, and they just like do that all night. So
that's fun. Very cool.
Yeah. So I don't know what they're called, but
that'd be your kind
what
of
I
band?
would suggest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah. I'll have to think about that one. I'll get back to you.
Mine, I also have a schizophrenic kind of music taste, a lot of everything. I landed on Miles Davis as my representation from a leadership perspective, only because when I was running the business for the first 10 or so years, if a key employee decided to leave, I would get so wrapped around the axle around it because I took it personally, like it was an offense to how I was leading or the business or the culture, and ultimately realized it's okay if people have their own kind of stopportunity and they want to go do something else. So Miles Davis would hire Chick Corea or Wayne Shorter or Tony Williams or Ron Carter. And while they were together, he would say, we are going to be the most badass band we can possibly be. We're going to make magic happen. But if you need to go and do your own thing, I'm going to support you when you're ready to go do that. So that kind of gave me this sense of relief at knowing that, we're going to make music together. And then when it's time for you to move on, I will applaud you. So.
Yeah, I love that. That's something that I think about all the time. And it depends sometimes on the situation, if it's bad or good, right? When a person leaves.
Yeah.
So if they're leaving because they hate you and you're a terrible leader, like that's a data point.
Yes,
but,
exactly.
But in most cases, like that's probably not it. especially if you're hiring like dynamic, ambitious young professionals who want to start their own thing or be their own leaders as well.
Yeah.
And in that case, it's like you cheer them on and you support them and you're happy for them. Right? We had one sales director who joined us and then he left, a few months later, but he was going to another role at another amazing start, like just phenomenal opportunity. And one of those ones we talk about, like once or twice in your life, you get that opportunity. And I was like, you know what? I'm excited for you, man. Congratulations. Like, I would love to help you. Like, I want you here, but you're going over to take a leadership role and to lead the sales team for this organization. Like, you should take that job. I would tell you to take that job. If you came to me and you weren't asking my opinion, but like if you did, I would have told you to take it too. And I'm proud of them. I'm like, it's actually a sign of the organization you have. Some of my mentors, it's kind of a similar story. In the 90s, in GE, General Electric, they had a really strong culture, a winning culture, especially within healthcare and medtech sales. And like 15 to 20 years later, the crew of people that were there make up like 50% of medical device CEOs in the United States. So that type of organization created the success and the learning and the lessons and the culture to not just win at that time, but to create the future leaders of the industry, right? And that says a lot. So the person who was in charge at that time, like, yeah, people were leaving and moving on at some point, but what better honor and feeling could you have than knowing that those types of people are now doing such amazing things and gone on to do that. So,
that is really inspiring. I remember there was a period of time where I bought a box of boomerangs. So whenever one of my really good stars was going for a great opportunity, I would hand him a boomerang on the way out and just say, man, there's always a place for you here if you want to come back. So
that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was fun. One last question. And we talked a little about this earlier. There's a version of your life where none of this happens. The Afghanistan thing didn't happen. What do you think of? How do you react to that?
I think if that didn't happen, I don't know what could have happened. There are some paths that my life could have taken. One is I could have just stayed in the military for a lot longer. And that path would have been enjoyable for me, professionally and personally. But then I think it would have been really hard long term to have a family and to be there for them, because it's just the nature of the job for that environment where you're gone, more than your home. And so that's a big challenge. And I don't know if that was the case, if my life would be better or worse. There's certainly not like a guarantee that it would be any better. In some aspects, if I think about that, physically, maybe I wouldn't be injured, or I'd be able to walk or be able to do certain things that I couldn't do otherwise. But the journey I've been on the past time since I've been injured, likely, I would argue, has likely offered more fulfillment, more gratitude, more impact for people I care about, more opportunities. Like, the journey I've been on is crazy. Like, and I don't know that I ever would have had the chance to do the things that I've done without it, nor as impactful, right? Because like the military has impact and special operations has impact, but what I'm doing now could have the potential to impact millions of people and transform an area of medicine that's really meaningful and impactful for decades to come. And that may not have been the same impact on society or humanity if I was still in the special operations community. There's also a chance that if I didn't get injured, I could have been, killed or injured even worse a year or two later, right? So so there's the positive outcome, the negative outcome, or somewhere in between. Um, and yeah, and so I'm grateful for all the opportunities that I've had. And a lot of people they'll say, they'll ask you do you wish it was different? Or do you wish this didn't happen to you? Or if you could change it, would you? And that's a really hard question to answer. I don't know, because although I've dealt with this challenge physically and from this injury, my life is amazing. And a lot of it's hard to separate. It's hard for me to understand or separate or quantify the negative part of that with all of the beautiful and positive things that have come from that.
Yeah.
And to say, how do I trade that and let go of all these things that I've had, and things I'm talking about is I didn't have children when I was injured. Now I do. And they're amazing. And I have twin boys.
Yeah.
I didn't spend as much time as with my wife, spent way less time with my wife, but when I was in the military. Now we have a great relationship and I spend a ton, those sorts of things are hard to put a value on.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, I can't think of a better way to wrap up our time together, but I will say I am very grateful for what you have done and the life you have lived, managing and leveraging the disruptive moment. And you have turned this opportunity into just this amazingly inspiring story in life that no doubt will inspire our leaders and your legacy and everyone you come in contact with. So I thank you, brother, for sharing that with us today. Really.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's a pleasure, and thank you for all you've done for us. And if I'd leave the audience with one or two things, what I would say is, it's natural to feel helpless at times, or like things are out of your control. But a lot of times, I would propose that there's a choice in that, and most situations you have a choice to make, and things that seem like they're out of your control may not actually be out of your control. And so this resilience, this mindset, this reality that you're going to encounter challenges if you live long enough, no matter how challenging they may seem or how detrimental or impactful they may be in a negative way, they create these opportunities like you talked about. And ultimately at a certain point you're confronted with the choice. And so ensuring that you understand that, I think can really create these types of opportunities, right?
Yeah.
For you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, as they say in the back of the church, that will preach. Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Derek.
Awesome. Thank
All
you,
right.
Mark. Appreciate you.